Hello, everyone. I'm just going to get right to it. We're going to talk about a process that I call discovery and agreement, and that has become known more widely as conscious contracts. The topic gives us our conversational starting point: lose the fear. So, where does this fear in negotiation come from? It comes, I think, from two places in particular, from the way we conventionally understand what's happening when we're negotiating a contract. We approach it as if we are opponents competing for advantage. Advantage over the financials, over decision-making power, over the benefits that are going to evolve out of the relationship, where we see ourselves as in competition. And we also see ourselves in competition over the power to control outcomes in times of disruptive change. That's our conventional frame. In fact, lawyers are literally taught that we negotiate against the other party, which I think is a really rotten way to try to start a relationship with someone that you're going to be in business in. The other thing that sort of generates fear, in my opinion, is that there's this feeling of a power differential oftentimes. One party will be saying, I need them more than they need me. And so feels a lack of power. Or if they imagine down the line a legal dispute, they feel powerless because they don't have the deeper pockets, and they understand that there's systemic power in being the bigger company and having more money and more time to run out the clock. So this is where fear is generating from. And this is where we can shift so that we're not even standing in that frame anymore. And the place we should start is, what do we want the contract to do for us? Okay. And what basically a contract is for giving us clarity, predictability, right? Who's going to do what by when, and accountability. And in accountability, we're talking about what are the consequences of missing the mark, whatever mark we're talking about in that particular situation. And the conventional approach sees accountability as a conversation about getting a court to decide who's at fault and who should bear the loss. And so you can see why we kick back into that power differential and we start to feel fear. And it's this accountability conversation conventionally is not a conversation about how to solve the problem at hand. We're looking backwards. We're not generative, but destructive. So this is why I always like to start with, ultimately, what's the point of a contract? And the point of a contract is to create safety for the parties, right? But how many of us sign that contract feeling safe? So the next question is, what makes us safe, right? What is the source of safety? And again, conventionally, we think of that and we operate as if what we should do is try to predict all the possible scenarios that could happen and then create what outcomes should be, predicting what we want the outcome to be, even though we don't know where we'll be in the future. We just sort of are imagining it. Well, we've all learned there is no way to predict, and there's certainly no such thing as control. This last year and a half has taught us that, if it's taught us nothing else. So what we realize we need in a disruptive marketplace that's fast moving, that you can't predict and you can't control, we need a way to sense change as it's beginning to occur, or sense it when it drops on us suddenly. And we need a way to respond to it that takes into account the immediate present moment, the context, the complexity, the people who are involved in the situation itself, as opposed to hoping you predicted the future correctly and that the language in that contract is what you're going to need. So basically, you aren't on a train track in business. It's more like sailing at sea, right? You're sailing together and you need to be able to sense the weather and respond to it together in a way that keeps you both safe, right? So this is how I like to define safety. For me, safety is about enough predictability, right? You can't do without, you have to make a plan. You just have to understand that the plan needs to be held loosely, but you have to make a plan. And so that's enough, sufficient predictability. And then you need to have confidence that you're going to be able to take a meaningful role in responding to change, should it arise, and that you will have an equal voice in conflict, so that your voice is heard equally with all the other voices involved, and you get a fair shake. That, I think, is a beautiful definition of safety, and much more realistic than the idea that you're going to be able to predict and control for safety. It's impractical. So this is a much more practical. So how do we create this kind of safety? And again, the place we want to start is with power. Because where power really comes from is from how we understand accountability, how we understand the consequences of unfulfilled promises. In order to get our arms around that kind of accountability, we need power. And where do we find power? For me, there is a power that each of us holds that is absolute, and that is our power over our personal integrity, or in the case of a business, over the integrity of the corporation, the business itself. And so for me, integrity means aligning your actions with your deeply held values, right? And that is one thing over which you have complete control. There will be times when others can take away your money, your job, they can take away your freedom, they can take away your life, but they can never take away your personal integrity, what you chose to do in terms of your actions as they relate to your values. So that is yours. Your personal integrity is yours. You can sell it, you can give it away, or you can keep it. So with that understanding that this is a power from which you can operate and have total control, then let's go back to accountability. When we think about accountability in conventional terms, we think of the coercive power of the courts, and we feel powerless because we're not the ones with the big money and the high-powered lawyers. But even when the system doesn't empower us, we still have absolute control over whether we stay in alignment with our deeply held values. So we are accountable to our own integrity with open-eyed awareness of the consequences of choices we make that do not align with our integrity. So our first key step in sort of taking that seat of power that's based in that thing which is ours and no one else's, is to get really clear about what our core values, our core vision is, and our core mission is, so that we enter and engage in negotiations with the ability to constantly check alignment with what really matters to us and to make conscious choices about whether a proposal is going to work for us. So I suggest that we get really familiar with what is actually calling the shots for us, and then decide if that's what we want governing our decisions. Because for a lot of us, what we think others believe we should do or what others say should be important often will have a strong influence on our decision-making. And we rarely really take a conscious, clear-eyed look at exactly what those imagined expectations are and whether those are the expectations that make sense to us and the life or the business we want to lead. So another, as much as the conventional mindset sees negotiation as adversarial, I think the more practical approach, rather than coming at it as opponents, is to understand we are in negotiations to design and build a good business relationship. Right? That just makes sense. The contract can serve as a handbook for operating that relationship successfully. The contract, we can build it as our sense and response system. So we negotiate and make our plan within the context of our present circumstances but the world is always in motion and change is natural and to be expected. So sometimes change means the plan laid out in the terms of the contract doesn't make sense anymore for one or both parties. And when that change arrives and brings tension or dispute, the solution is generated at the level of the relationship. So it matters as you negotiate what kind of relationship you built. And then it matters that the relationship was created to serve a purpose, to fulfill a mission and achieve a beneficial purpose for both parties. And that when they're faced with disruptive change, well, what can we do that will keep the mission on track, keep it generating that intended benefit of our agreement and relationship? We know that in the conventional process, lawyers and legal are pretty much guaranteed to put the whole thing off track and destroy the relationship and suck the value out of the endeavor. So what discovery and agreement, this approach or conscious contracts, helps you provide yourself a way to come together quickly, evaluate the situation, explore available options, and choose the next steps based on what you as co-venturers in the business endeavor think makes best sense. So how does this all tie together? First, we use the negotiation conversation to explore and build out our relationship by calibrating the alignment of our visions, our missions, and our values. Like, these are mine, what are yours? How does what we want to do fit with that? Are we in alignment? Is this a good relationship for us? And then that exploration culminates in writing up a contract that supplies guidelines and guardrails for successfully navigating disruptive change. This is that sense and response system. We can actually build structures and systems into the contract language that will direct energy and effort towards solving the underlying problems or conflicts, and put the power to do that in the hands, not of the courts, not of the lawyers, not of the people who have some other agenda, but in the hands of the people best qualified to totally understand the context and complexity and circumstances, and that's you. So this kind of navigational framework within contracts is exactly what was used by the big pharmaceutical companies who normally compete with one another when they needed to streamline the creation of COVID vaccines. Rather than hammer out detailed predict and control scenarios, they created this kind of agreement amongst themselves that gave them the ability to move swiftly and make adjustments as they went along, keeping the key goal, that vision of that COVID vaccine, readily available. And that was their mission as well, always at the center of the decision-making and planning as they went. So to build a good business relationship, trust is essential, right? The absence of trust means that things cannot run smoothly. So to have an efficient, productive, and enjoyable relationship, you need trust. And how do you build it? In his book, The Speed of Trust, which I highly recommend, by Stephen M.R. Covey, C-O-V-E-Y, Stephen Covey, The Speed of Trust. He identifies the two key elements of trust. One is demonstrate integrity. And now we've talked about that, right? Express your core values, the core drivers, why you do, what matters to you, and then act in alignment with those, demonstrate integrity. The other key element is competence, right? Obviously, you don't trust someone who's not competent, but you have to understand also that a lot of mistrust and misunderstanding comes from not articulating expectations clearly. And so what you interpret as incompetence is actually a misalignment of expectations. So that's another part of the negotiation conversation, to get really clear about setting out expectations about levels and areas of competence, expectations that may not have been articulated, and also checking that your expectations are realistic. So altogether, we shift from two opponents competing to win the deal and make the other start out as a loser, to having a conversation, exploring the vision of each party, the mission we're joining forces to achieve together, and the values that we want to work in alignment with, that really matter to each of us. And then we want to calibrate and confirm understanding of expectations. So here we are, we're negotiating from integrity, we're exploring trustworthiness, we're getting a practice to see as we talk if our negotiation partner walks their talk. They may say they value something, but then we start to see that their behaviors and the way that they're interacting with us is out of alignment with that. So all of this is, you use the negotiation to test and retest and explore and build that relationship. And then you use that understanding to create a commitment that you will use that vision, mission, and values and your key expectations and needs as your design criteria that everyone will use going forward for making decisions, evaluating proposals, designing solutions. And you put it in the language of the contract where you set up a framework for having those change conversations. How will we alert one another early when something is getting off track or when we feel tension rising? What's our process for getting together and using our criteria, our real criteria, holding ourselves accountable to our own integrity? What is our process for getting together and using our criteria to co-design the path forward and stay on track? Stay on track for the benefit that we have chosen to join forces to achieve. So I love Anne Lamott. She says, expectations are resentments waiting to happen. And I say, unspoken expectations are really the issue, because I think agendas are fine. It's hidden agendas that are the seeds of destruction. So think really carefully about articulating expectations and exploring expectations. And now I can almost hear people thinking, yeah, this all sounds really good, but I'm trying to negotiate with major monolith corporate person, and there's no way they're going to do vision, mission, values with me. And so my response to that is, it only takes one. By changing your approach to negotiation, you present the other party with a different array of choices than the conventional negotiation would present to them. And that creates an opening for a new path. If nothing else, it creates a different quality of conversation and a different content of conversation that will help you illuminate more of what your potential contracting partner is like, what they value. It also, because you have articulated on your own vision, mission, and value statement, you will know your higher yes that helps you articulate when you and why you need to say no to a proposal, because it doesn't align with your core values, needs, or goals. Now, this concept of a higher yes informing a positive no is really beautifully expounded in the book by William Ury. His last name is spelled U-R-Y. And the name of the book is The Power of a Positive No. This is another book that I highly recommend. It's short, it's easy to read, and it's a really good handbook for how to enter negotiations and conduct negotiations, again, from the seat of power. And so what he calls the higher yes, I call sort of expanded out into the vision, mission, and values, expectations, and needs that you've articulated for yourself, so you know what really matters. So again, we've shifted from opponents to co-designers of an ideal business relationship in this conversation. Even if your other party doesn't see it that way, if you see it that way, you're going to drop a lot of fear right there. You're going to put the focus on what really matters: vision, mission, values, expectations, and needs. Now, the shorthand term that I use for all of that is, for all of that set of problem solving and decision-making criteria, is touchstone. And they use the word touchstone because it serves the purpose of a touchstone. All of that information and criteria that you've expressed in writing for yourself is used to test the quality of any proposal or plan and check what is central, its alignment with what's central and most important to you. And then, using that touchstone, create the contract as a handbook for staying aligned with what really matters to the parties by making the touchstone expressly the agreed criteria for evaluating the acceptability of any proposed solution for all decision making. And also using the contract to custom design your own procedure for alerting when alignment starts to slip, for calling and having a realignment conversation focused on getting back on track with the touchstone and staying there. So even if it's only for you, having a clearly articulated touchstone is a statement that continually aligns you and realigns you with your personal integrity. And that means you'll stay connected with and in flow of your greater source of power, your autonomy, your ability to choose your own responses rather than being the unwitting victim of manipulation, emotional or otherwise. So what this does is it puts you in the seat of power. And instead of being completely overwhelmed by the idea of power differentials or the idea of they know better than I know, what you know better than anybody else knows is what really matters to you and what makes sense to you. And you can have a conversation based on this aligns or it doesn't align, not based on I need you more than you need me. Do you see how it shifts? It takes you out of this place of taking instructions from fear. So you're taking instructions from your own integrity instead. So, what is this vision, mission, values? We hear this all the time and it gets taken as kind of corporate marketing speech. So in this context, I'm talking about something much deeper and much more profound. When I use the word vision, I mean, what is your big why? What makes doing your work worthwhile? What does it bring to the world to make it a better place? And what is the particular mission that you want to accomplish by entering this relationship? Why is it better to join forces with this person or company rather than with another company or doing it yourself? What do they bring that you need? What do you bring that they need? And what are your core values, keys to satisfaction in a working relationship? I mean, what is playing well with others look like? And what are your expectations around that? And then also, what are the constraints and imperatives, your expectations and needs that must be met? Now, what is interesting is that we all feel like we know this within ourselves. But when we sit down and actually try to write it out, we discover that we are far less articulate and far less connected to it than we imagined. So I always insist that this be something you do in writing. And the negotiation then becomes a conversation to calibrate the alignment of these. And you can, if you know yours, you can share it with the other party. You can say, this is what really matters to me. This is what is driving my bus in all decision-making and problem solving. And you can ask for theirs. Now, oftentimes you won't get anything back from them. And if you don't get anything back from them, that's fine. They probably have a lot of information about themselves online that you can go look at and you can make a guess. You can say, well, here's mine and here's what I think yours is. And the beauty of doing that is that people don't like to be misunderstood and they will generally correct you if you get it wrong. So you then have, like I said, opened the conversation in a new way and presented a new array of choices. And you are beginning to explore and build a real relationship, not just a one-upsmanship, oppositional competition. So the final piece is this process for how you're going to hold change conversation and realignment conversation. And this is a custom created thing that you make yourselves with the support of whatever consultant or legal provider that you have working with you. I call it addressing change and engaging disagreement. So this is setting up your own bug fix process, right? You have a contract, it has terms and conditions. We kind of think of that as software. Something happens, there's a bug in the software, we need a bug fix. We don't need to go to the lawyers and have them take the software completely apart and break it. But we do need to have a way to talk. And we also need kind of an early alert system for rising tension in case expectations aren't being met, or in case somebody has some big change that makes the plan not work anymore. So we need to know how to ask for the conversation and how to have the conversation and what to do if we can't find a fix on our own that works for everyone, and what to do if even with a facilitated effort at that conversation, we still can't get to resolution. So those steps are very important. So it is this, what I call the ACED, addressing change and engaging disagreement, that provides you with those structures and systems for directing energy and effort towards solving the underlying problem, rather than towards getting someone to interpret the contract and language to tell you how it's going to impact your reality, regardless of what makes sense. So this is the place where you decide how you're going to structure coming together to talk about what the problem is, talk about how the change is impacting you, look again at your touchstone. What are the criteria? What are our design specifications for a good solution? And let's co-design a solution together that may be even better than what we had originally planned. And the other thing is to address the relationship of your contract with the conventional system, right? Because this all is taking place within the context of the legal system. It does exist. And so what is very important, in fact, crucial to include, is a contractually binding commitment that the parties will use this addressing change and engaging disagreement process before they use any other dispute resolution procedure. So in effect, you use the courts and the system's coercive power to keep you from becoming victims of the court's coercive power, to kick you back into your own process. And don't get me wrong, the hell of litigation is always out there. This is just a way to give yourselves the chance to decide for yourselves what makes best sense, rather than having to go as supplicants to the courts and ask them to interpret your contract language to tell you how it will impact your reality. This is a way to stay agile. This is a way to stay responsive. This is a way to retain the power of self-determination and to continue to align constantly with that touchstone, with that real integrity of who you are and why, what really matters. So again, having a clearly articulated touchstone that continually aligns you and realigns you with your personal integrity and your corporate personal integrity will mean that you can stay in connection with your source of power, the power that no one else can take from you. And that gives you your autonomy, your ability to choose your own responses rather than being a victim of manipulation. So with your vision, mission, values, constraints, and imperatives in hand, you don't have to wonder how to measure the virtue or faults of a decision. You have a whole new perspective on how to respond to pressure from the other party. All you have to do is check to see whether their proposal is in alignment with your deeply held values and principles, with your core constraints and imperatives, with, does this match up with what I actually need? And we're not talking merely on a spiritual plane. We're talking about, is this financially viable? I have to know all of that. That's part of my constraints and imperatives. And whether it serves your vision, is this taking me in the direction I want my company to go? And whether it furthers the mission, is this what I want to be up to in the world right now? And if it suits your key needs and expectations for the endeavor, for a good working relationship. So all of that is there. You don't have to wonder, you just check alignment and you minimize in yourself the sense of powerlessness that will often lead to irrational behavior or to taking instructions from fear. And that is what I have to offer in terms of talking at you.